Good afternoon. It's Friday the 28th of February 2020, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me today in the studio, Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
And we're going to get straight on with Syria and Turkey, Patrick, because, well, of course, last night the allegation is that Syria and allegedly Russia killed at least 33 Turkish troops. Of course, the Syrians and the Russians saying that this was attacks on Al-Qaeda-linked groups on positions that they hold in Idlib. But the first question to ask, I suppose, Pat, is were these really Turkish troops?
Well, this is the big question, and this actually was the same question, Mike, that was being asked when this identical type of incident happened just a few weeks ago, which triggered the current issues between the two countries.
Yes. So today, the Turkish minister, Sul Akar, claimed that Turkish artillery and, as you can see on screen, unmanned aerial vehicles hit 200 what they described as regime targets in Idlib, that they say neutralized 309 regime troops, destroyed 5 helicopters, 23 battle tanks, 23 guns, and also an air defense system and the Pantsir S-1 air defense system as well. So they say they've done quite a bit of damage here. And he also said that Russia knew in advance about the location of Turkish troops that were killed in Idlib. Well, what did we have from the British press? Well, we have Quentin Somerville here from the BBC saying today's losses bring the number of Turkish sources. Well, he's retweeting Shashank Joshi saying today's losses bring the total number of Turkish soldiers killed in Idlib to 52 since the start of February. Several reportedly died in Russian airstrikes, though Turkey is loath to admit so. So this is the type of narrative that's coming out of via the British press. This morning then, the Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, announced that the North Atlantic Council was going to meet following Turkey's request for an Article 4 consultation on the situation in Syria. He said under Article 4 of the treaty, any ally can request consultations whenever, in the opinion of any of them, their territorial integrity, political independence or security is threatened. So the North Atlantic Council, if you remember, that includes the ambassadors of all 29 NATO allies. They met this morning, and as Stoltenberg says there, under Article 4, any ally can request consultations whenever they feel like. Now, the key point here, Patrick, is that Article 4 is a mandatory precursor to Article 5. Article 5 is the Mutual Defence Clause, and the question is, did Turkey attempt to invoke Article 5 this morning at that meeting? Of course, Jens Stoltenberg wasn't saying, and even though he was questioned about this after he gave his press conference this morning by the journalists at the press conference, he wasn't saying. We'll come on to Article 5 in a second. What he did say was that today's meeting is a sign of solidarity with Turkey. He said that NATO continues to support Turkey with a range of measures, including by augmenting its air defences, which helps Turkey against the threat of missile attacks from Syria. And he said, I thank Turkey for briefing allies regularly on the situation on Syria. Allies will continue to follow developments in the southeastern border of NATO very closely. I think that's a very key statement there. He is absolutely making it clear that this is an attack on NATO. But of course, this build-up for some kind of intervention has been building for quite some time, as we highlighted on last Friday's programme, Patrick. This was Mark Lowcock at the United Nations Security Council saying 900,000 people are displaced in northwest Syria. People are living in the most horrific conditions. Young children are freezing to death. It's a humanitarian horror story. And this narrative then echoed yesterday by Jonathan Allen, again at the Security Council. The intensity and pace of the Syrian and Russian campaign means that civilians who are able to get out of the way in time have nowhere to go. They have no shelter. They're forced to sleep in open air. Children are literally freezing to death. And again, let's come back to the BBC and Quentin Somerville, who's retweeting more rhetoric where children have died in the cold. They're starting to build up the same type of rhetoric, the same type of narrative that they have attempted to do in the past when they've been trying to build up some kind of desire for some kind of support for intervention.
These are emotive arguments, they're humanitarian arguments, and they thrust the children forward and you'll see all of the news reports. The camera's always focused on the faces of the children constantly, and they're choosing the worst possible backdrops they can in order to film and just to show the suffering, etc. So humanitarian disaster, hence we must intervene. We have a, quote, responsibility to protect. This is back to the ARB2P doctrine. So through Turkey's occupation, illegal occupation of Syria, and Turkey's illegal backing of extremist militant forces in Syria, and then folding them under the wing of the Turkish military to give them official, in effect, Article 5 coverage, Mike. I argued this 3 years ago, and a lot of people didn't take a lot of heed to it. But my point is that at some point, the U.S. or Turkey, they will pull the Article 5 card when they need to, and in order to stop Syria from liberating its territory. And here we are in 2020, and it's happened.
It looks like it's happening. It looks like it's moving in that direction. Anyway, as we mentioned at last week's Security Council, Karen Pierce absolutely focused on Russia. But then we had the narrative from the German ambassador to the UN in the Security Council saying we have an immense responsibility that we face here as the United Nations, as the Security Council, to stop what's happening. Now, of course, the problem is the Security Council isn't going to take any action here because any proposal from Western nations is going to be vetoed by Russia and possibly China as well. But let's just look at what it says in Article 5 of NATO. So here is Article 5. And it says the parties agree that an armed attack against one or more of them in Europe or North America. Is Turkey considered Europe for this purpose? I'm not certain.
This is a good question.
Yes. Shall be considered an attack against them all. Consequently, they agree that if such an armed attack occurs, each of them, in exercise of the right of individual or a collective self-defense, recognized by Article 51 of the Charter of the United Nations, will assist the party or parties so attacked by taking forthwith, individually and in concert with other parties, such actions as it deems necessary, including the use of armed force to restore and maintain the security of the North Atlantic area. Now, so the focus is on the North Atlantic area, but what that also implies is that, of course, how much involvement you take directly is a sovereign decision by each nation individually. But then Article 5 goes on to say, any such armed attack and all measures taken as a result thereof shall immediately be reported to the Security Council. Such measures shall be terminated when the Security Council has taken the measures necessary to restore and maintain international peace and security. So this part of Article 5 basically says, well, NATO is taking upon itself the right to do whatever it feels necessary, but it must, whatever it does, it must keep the Security Council involved. And if the Security Council should then decide to step in, then all NATO operations should cease at that point. But of course, the Security Council is a divided body at this point, and there isn't really any prospect at this stage, should this escalate, of the Security Council stepping in. So this is a very dangerous situation, Patrick, it seems to me. And I ask again, did Turkey attempt to invoke Article 5 today? Stoltenberg wasn't saying, it's not clear yet, but the suspicion must be that they have been keeping NATO informed. As Stoltenberg said in his press conference, they have been keeping NATO informed at every step of the way. So today's Article 4 meeting was exceptional. And it is a mandatory precursor to invoking Article 5. I believe that is probably what they were doing. And perhaps, sorry, just before you comment, Pat, perhaps we get a clue from this, because NetBlocks was making the point that, yes, that over the last 24 hours, Turkey's internet social media platforms have all effectively been shut down. So Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Facebook Messenger all blocked via multiple internet providers in Turkey. Real-time network data indicate filtering in effect by the operators, incident ongoing. So that's not downtime by some kind of technical issue. That is filtering by the providers. That can only have happened as a result of a government request.
Well, what you're seeing is a preparations possibly by this Turkish government for war with Syria. There's also been statements that are circulating right now about Turkey ordering or preparing for an attack, a full-on attack on the city of Aleppo. And I might remind people as well that President Erdogan in Turkey has made multiple public statements. You can go ahead and look these up, especially if you put in Turkish language, saying that he believes that Aleppo should be part of Turkey, or should come under the Turkish, auspices. And he's made a lot of these neo-Ottoman type statements in public addresses quite frequently, and it's part of his thing, like Trump. It's kind of his "Make Turkey Great Again" whole shtick. Okay, but what we have is very dangerous here, Mike. There's no way that this qualifies under Article 5 for the simple reason that Turkey is not being attacked. The country of Turkey,
they've invaded Syria. They've been attacked on foreign soil, so it's not an attack on a sovereign nation.
Exactly. So it's trying to make this stick from an Article 5 point of view is not possible. So, but this is a very dangerous that they're invoking the treaties in this way, Mike, because this is the sort of power politics and entangling alliances and kind of the vague interpretation of alliance treaties that led to a situation like World War I, where you have a war for war's sake and not for any really good underlying reason at all. Not that any wars have good underlying reason, but this is the danger of the current situation. So, you can't stress that enough, how dangerous this is right now.
Well, let's just remind ourselves of what the Russian ambassador to the UN said in the Security Council last week, because it is extremely relevant to what's going on. He said, "We have heard of all of today's rhetoric on many occasions this month. You're playing the card of civilian suffering and long-term truce every time the terrorists you cherish are in danger." So that was an attack by Vasily Nebenzia on the Western powers and on Turkey. The terrorists you cherish, we do cherish these people, these so-called rebels in northwestern Syria at the moment. Our governments do, at least. And so that's pretty much deserved criticism.
But he has hit the nail on the head here. He knows exactly what the game is. And the game is this. The reason this is kicking off right now, Mike, is because the United States is completely out of the loop. They've been out of the loop with the Sochi process. They've been out of the loop with the Astana process, all these different peace processes, ceasefire arrangements between Turkey, between Syria, bringing in Iran and bringing in all the stakeholders. Even the rebel militants, as they're called, they were even included in Sochi and in the Astana process, okay? The U.S. was not invited, okay? So they're not a broker anymore for the region. And so what this will bring, if they can make this a big enough crisis, it will open the door for the United States to enter with peacekeeping forces. Now, once the U.S. have any kind of an international mandate to have troops on the ground in Syria, that then justifies the other troops they have in northeastern Syria, Mike, that are occupying the oil fields currently. So in a way, it kind of green lights all these sort of illegal occupying activities that the United States has been engaged in Syria now for years, okay? But it'll mean that the U.S. will have its foot. It'll be able to put its boot down in Idlib, or in some way, shape, or fashion, or NATO countries will do that on behalf of the United States. But it'll legitimize international forces, basically, in Syria, and also make it almost impossible to clear out the terrorist factions that are currently occupying the province of Idlib.
So we'll end with Quentin Somerville once again, who's retweeting Bethan McKernan, who's taken a photograph of the Russian Admiral Makarov. 2 ships Russia has said they're sending to the Mediterranean, to the region, equipped with Caliber cruise missiles for the Syrian coast. And of course, implying that Russia is doing something aggressive in this. I view that somewhat differently. That looks to me like Russia's doing something defensive here, because it's, at the end of the day, Turkey is involved itself in an insurgency in another state. It really shouldn't be there.
Invading another state.
Yes.
Its neighbor, in fact. So Turkey is doing a violation of the Nuremberg Principles, which is undeclared war of aggression against a neighboring UN member state. So, from just by the definition of the letter of the law, Turkey is in violation of international law. But as we see time and time again, international law does not apply
Yes.
to some countries, only to others.
Yes.